There is a movie about fathers, sons, mothers, and grandparents, and what happens when one of them has deep-seated personal struggles that hurt everybody. That's 2024's Exhibiting Forgiveness.
How do you forgive when you continue to experience the effects of those who've wronged you every day? This is the challenge for Terrell in Exhibiting Forgiveness, regarding whether he will forgive his estranged father or not. And is forgiveness even a requirement to move on?
I'm Heit.
And I'm Cheri.
And you've discovered Axiom Amnesia.
We want to thank all of the supporters who helped to make this video possible. If you want your name to appear alongside these contributors, make a one-time donation via Cash App, or you can head on over to patreon.com/axiomamnesia to enjoy all of the benefits of becoming a monthly subscriber. The executive producer of this video is King James, who requested this film through Axiom Amnesia's Deep Dive on Demand program that we'll tell you more about later. So the first thing you should know is that there are going to be spoilers because this is a deep dive on demand and we are going to be talking about all aspects of this film. So if you haven't seen this movie, Exhibiting Forgiveness, that came out in 2024, go ahead and hop off the call. Let us talk about a summary of the film. In Exhibiting Forgiveness, acclaimed painter Terrell, who's played by Andre Holland, faces turmoil when his estranged, recovering addict father, LaRon, also known as Ronnie in the film, played by John Earl Jelks, seeks reconciliation and is encouraged by his mother, Joyce, who's played by Aunjanue Ellis Taylor, to try to make contact with Terrell. And so, supported by his wife, Aisha, who's played by Andra Day, Terrell confronts deep-seated childhood trauma, exploring the complexities of forgiveness and generational healing. Directed by Titus Kaphar, the film offers an intimate portrayal of a family's struggle to mend fractured relationships. And so we want to give a little bit of background because we did a little digging into the director, Titus Kaphar, and we found out that he is an artist. And so the artist that we see in this film, Terrell, is, I guess this story is loosely based on him. He had a lot in common with Terrell because he too had an issue with his estranged father. So the stories of his life, although not identical, are really kind of similar to what we see in this movie.
Right. So I wonder why it's not just completely autobiographical in that you name the character as like Titus, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of renaming the characters to some fictional character.
Well, because it's not the same, like in the story,
But that's the same with every autobiography, right? Or
maybe he felt it was
film.
Too different, right? Because, which characters, that are the focal points are a little bit different in his life. And, so maybe he felt that.
Yeah, and if you have the control, but I think we see this in every film that's really a biography.
Yeah, we do. And just to kind of talk about the cast for a second, Aunjanue Ellis, who plays his mother, Joyce, in the movie, we have just been seeing a lot of her lately. And every film that she's in, she puts down a tremendous performance, which I think is just really amazing. I didn't know Andre Holland nor John Earl Jelks, who played the father and son in this movie. But of course, Aisha, who is Terrell's wife, is played by Andra Day. And we saw her in a movie recently. The
Deliverance, I think.
The Deliverance, yes, which was this kind of, I guess, horror, sort of crazy, movie where a woman's house is possessed. And that also had Monique in it. Y'all remember, because we covered it on, we actually covered it on the Heit and Cheri channel. So we talked about that in great detail. When you look at the cast, they all seem to have really good chemistry. And I thought they worked really well together and the story was very believable. But to get back to Titus Kaphar, he was just a very interesting person. He's done a couple of TED Talks, but he himself is an artist and he likes to, the way I would describe his art in layman's terms would be he does a lot of art that centers around Black folks. And in one of his series, he did a lot of cutouts. And in this movie, we see the artist do that same sort of technique. And in fact, some of the art that we see in the film is his art. And they said that Andre Holland, the actor who plays Terrell, had to go or was demanded of him that he go and learn how to become a painter for 3 months as part of the process of making this film. So let's just get into what the film, like kind of more details about what actually happens so we can have some real discussion, on this. So at the beginning, the film opens up with this quote from James Baldwin, and it's being narrated by Terrell, who is the main character. And it says, if the relationship of father to son could really be reduced to biology, the whole world would blaze with the glory of fathers and sons. But sometimes biology leaves us with only smoldering embers. So we know, even before we see what's going on in this film, that it's probably going to be about the latter, because if it was about a wonderful relationship,
we wouldn't even have a movie.
Exactly.
Right. But so when you couple that with the title, then you already know what's going to happen in the film. Want us to cover your favorite movie ASAP? For a limited time, a $25 donation gets you a deep dive on demand, a 30-minute discussion on any film you choose, delivered within about 30 days.
It's easy. Step 1, send $25 via our website, axiom.app, or Cash App, $Axiom Amnesia, links below. Step 2, tell us your movie and email. And step 3, watch your deep dive on demand with your name listed as executive producer.
Lock in your deep dive on demand today and hurry. Spots are limited, and a $25 minimum donation amount won't last.
This offer is not valid for filmmakers or distributors, subject to availability, and terms apply. So it opens up and we see, this man who clearly is kind of disheveled, and he's working outside of a convenience store doing something with a car. He's comes into the store, and then he witnesses a situation where like the store owner is being robbed, and there's this conflict going on, and he tries to intervene, and he gets beaten. He beats the robber with the bat first, and then for whatever reason, I guess he's tired, he turns his back on the guy, and the guy gets up, and then
he turns to go to the freezer, and it appears that he is going to get alcohol. So right after he stomped the dude out, basically beat him down, then he goes and turns to get alcohol, and that's when the robber gets a chance to take him down. So then the robber takes him down and beats him up.
Oh, okay. I hadn't picked up that it was to get the alcohol for whatever reason in my mind. So yeah, so he's, beaten up, and then we see him jump, go to a scene where, we're introduced to Terrell. And so this man who's an artist with a son and a wife who's a singer, but he's having night terrors. So the first time we see Terrell, he has these night terrors, and he's waking up, and it's startling to his wife and whatever. And then we go back to Ronnie, or LaRon, and that's Terrell's father. And so this man, he shows up at a guy's house who helps him inside, and we find out that this is actually his brother. And so the guy cuts his hair and he cleans him up, and Ronnie is crying in the shower, and he's so dirty that you can see like all of the debris just in the bottom of the shower from when, he's getting clean, because he's just been in the streets and, is just scrapping to survive. Ronnie's brother is, there and kind of assisting, and Ronnie finally is clean and he gets to lay down on the couch. And then a woman comes home who is his wife, who is Ronnie's brother's wife. And she's like, oh no, when she sees him there, and she's like, well, I want him out because there's been a history. And so she starts talking about how, he stole from her and took her, jewelry and stuff like that. So then we kind of start piecing together what Ronnie's issue is, with substances and whatnot, because whatever he's doing, he's stealing, and he's, and it's ruined some of the relationships in his life, right? Yeah. So the brother winds up taking Ronnie to a shelter because his wife was like, you got to go. And the man at the shelter is talking, and he's like, well, you got to go to church if you come here, and then you got to go to recovery meetings. Like, it's a lot of demands. And I was thinking like, wow, so you really have to comply with rules that might even seem to have nothing to do with your recovery from from somebody who might or might not be religious, right? But you got to become religious if you're going to go stay there. Which what alternative did he have? Because he had nowhere to go. So anyway, we conclude that Ronnie, has issues with addiction. So meanwhile, we see Terrell, and he's painting this, houses which look like they're in a neighborhood or whatever. And, he's got this big painting, and these paintings are huge, like mural size. Then the artist's mother lives in this house that we see he's painting, or at least has painted some of, one of these houses in the neighborhood. And so he winds up talking to her on the phone because she's supposed to be moving nearer to him. And so he and his family arrive to his mother's house in order to help her move. And she hasn't packed or anything and whatnot. But the mother is played by Ingenue Ellis. She basically is not in any rush to leave this house. And it's disappointing because Terrell is like, I want to stay here as short of a time as I have to and get in and get out. And he's not able to really do that. And so next thing we know, Ronnie or LaRon has approached Terrell outside of his mother's home. And Terrell is so shocked, he just runs inside. And then the father comes in and whatever. And the father says that the mother has told him to come by. So Terrell is feeling like, why are you telling him to come over? I don't deal with him like that, basically is the vibe that we're getting. And we find out he hasn't seen his father in like 15 years. And the mother is like, Ronnie has changed, and, tries to convince Terrell to talk to his father. So this clearly is some time has passed since he's been at the shelter that he stayed at, and he's gotten some help, Ronnie has. And so now he's living a little bit differently. And Terrell's wife, she doesn't even know who Ronnie is because, it's been 15 years. So she's never even seen Ronnie, never met him. Terrell's wife later says to him, there are some things that just can't be worked out in canvas. So like in this first act, it's all laid out, the problems. You got a father and a son and a grandson, right? And we're trying not to have things happening, with these generations of fathers and sons, but you got a break. There's an estrangement or whatever that's happening. One of the things you said when we were watching is that Terrell's wife makes happy art. Her songs are more happy, and Terrell makes kind of sad art, right? Because he's a visual artist.
Right. So she's a singer or whatever, and she's writing songs about love and how good her relationship is and all of this. Right. And the art that we see from the artist in the film, Terrell, it's really about his negative childhood. Right. And all of that. But so one of the things that the director said, Titus, was that, once he started to make the film, then, he had to start considering, what people tell him, right, is what the audience wants. Right. But as a painter, and that sort of artist, he didn't have to think of that. And I think it's kind of the same way when you look at musicians too, where you have to release this product for an audience so that you can, sustain yourself, right? So I think it's one of the reasons, possibly, because not all singers and songwriters are just putting out positive, stuff or doing stuff for an audience, right? But that's one good way is if you make some positive art, per se, then that may be appealing to audiences, right? Which is why in music a lot of the songs were about love songs and having relationships and getting into relationships and all of that and getting the other person. But yeah, it's a stark contrast, I think. So I think it kind of shows the outlooks of the different, those different characters or the people in their relationship, which to me wasn't really explored in the film. And I still kind of think like, why was his wife in the movie?
And we should talk about that. Once we get through this summary, I think that is one of the questions we have on deck. Like, what role did his wife play and what was the deal, But we'll get to see some of her actions throughout the film, and maybe that'll help us piece it together. The next thing we see is Ronnie actually starts talking to Terrell, and Terrell lets him talk. So we see that it's almost like he's interviewing him because Terrell sets up this camera, and they're like, it almost looks like they're in a basement or something like that. And they're talking. And so Terrell's like, all right, go, and Terrell has this, very short attitude with his father. he's like, when did you first start using? And so then Ronnie is happy to kind of tell the story of what happened because he's almost willing to do anything to be able to interact with Terrell. So he tells the story about how this family member who was, on rock, basically, and had set the house on fire. And he snatched the pipe from her and then he tried it himself. And I was thinking, like, why would he do that? And then he describes that, he had never felt like that before, and one hit and he was just hooked and he could not think about anything but his next hit. And, he started basically smoking every day. And so
I think it was because the reason was that she said, you just don't understand. You don't get it, right? You don't get it. So I think it tried to point at some idea of curiosity, right? Or maybe I'm just so strong, this won't happen to me. It can't be all of that.
Or, and then another thought could be, what if it was like, life ain't that good and I sure would like to escape, because, we later hear about how hard that Ronnie's father was on him and he had issues. And so, maybe he was like, man, this might help to ease my pain a little bit too. But who knew that it would be so destructive? And one of the things we've talked about time and time again is basically how the epidemic of crack in our communities in the 1980s and 1990s really just tore families apart. And so this is a story talking about how it affected this family that we see in the film. Terrell goes on to tell his father, like, well, basically confirming he knew that he, was on something. As a child, he knew. And so Ronnie tells of finding out that, the story of how Terrell came to be and finding out that Terrell's mother was pregnant with him. And his father, Ronnie's father, told him to marry the mother and get health insurance so he can take care of his baby, right? And this whole health insurance conversation comes up because Terrell is like, well, did you go to the doctor? To Ronnie, and Ronnie's like, I only had health insurance one time in my life. And this was the one time after he married Terrell's mother, they had the baby. And then, he had health insurance for his baby on the advice of his father, who told him, marry a woman and get some health insurance for your baby. Ronnie then talks about his own father some more, and he's like, he describes him as this complicated man. He also said that Terrell was born out of sin. What'd you think of that? Like, to tell you born out of sin because they were not in wedlock.
Yeah, and the father was a pastor or whatever, a minister, something, right? So, that's just the way it is when you're in that religion, right, of Christianity. That's just the idea. Everyone is pretty much, right, born into it at the very least, right? So then if you take into the morals of marriage and all of that and being in wedlock, then that's just, I think it's just
was
a
the
descriptor,
judgment.
But it's that, like we always say, you could just state the way something is, say, hey, you are ignorant of this, and then the person receives it a certain way when you're just stating a fact that is attached to a word that is already have a negative connotation to it.
Ronnie is describing his father. It says his father was a good man, even though, he had pulled a gun out on him at some point and whatever. And
Terrell is just like, you just told me how he tried to kill you and grandma. How could you say that he's a good man?
And then Ronnie gets belligerent with Terrell, and then Terrell leaves, right?
Yeah. But we talk about that idea all the time about what makes somebody good or bad, right? And so even like with the sister and this father of that one decision to hit the rock, right? And then whatever happens after that, then that is what's used to determine. When really it can all be boiled down to that one decision that you yourself did not make, right? So then you start to judge basically everything on that one decision.
Titus, actually, the director, he actually talks about that, right? Because he's like, with regard to people who are incarcerated and looking at how they are treated, he was saying, like, it's this one
their worst
thing
made,
that, and then that just, you're just gone forever because of just their worst thing that you did.
Right. And with The Rock, it's basically like, from what almost all accounts, is that first hit.
And you just chasing that same feeling again and never ever getting it like the first time, then we get this flashback, because this is another thing that happens in this film where we see, even in modern or the current time, sometimes Terrell as a child will show up in the same scene with Terrell as an adult, and then also we get these flashbacks. And so we get a flashback of Terrell as I guess, how old would you say he is? He's probably 12 or so,
Yeah, probably
something like that. And he's working with his father, Ronnie, and a nail goes through his foot. Like literally, he steps on the nail because they're supposed to be mowing lawns or whatever. He steps on the nail and it goes through his foot. And Ronnie has like zero sympathy. And he talks about how you have to be able to outwork the next person. And all that matters is that. And so, basically the foot is wrapped in a rag and he makes him keep working to mow this lawn. And they're mowing lawns, even through his foot being messed up. And you could see little Terrell is just having a hard time. And, but he gets through it, but not before his father, like, even on the street, kind of like physically is pushing him and like, you better do that, and threatening him that if he doesn't do it, that, there'll be consequences, physical consequences and stuff.
So yeah, this is an idea of like what a so-called tough love or tough upbringing, and is it required? Because it's brought up that, hey, Terrell, you turned out all right, and I was tough on you as a father, right? And that's why you're able to be whoever to whatever father. You are at this elevated level because of your upbringing, right? And that's always a question,
right?
That
could they have been that, or did you actually hurt them? Right? Could he have been even better? Because look, Terrell might have accomplished a lot, but he also is paying daily because he has these night terrors. He is not at peace, even though he hadn't seen his father in 15 years. Even in spite of that, he still wasn't at peace. Now, what I would like to know is, did the night terrors come on just because he knew he was going back home, to get his mother? And, when you think of like, you get the anxiety of going back to the place where so many bad things happen. Is that why? Or was he having this for the entire 15 years? I don't know. Then we see that once they leave, so they get paid because they're mowing lawns for other people to get money. So once they leave and, the father has gotten paid for the work that they have done, the hard work, then the Terrell is like, we should go home and tell mama, about all the money and she'll be so happy. And the father was like, nah, we ain't telling her about this money.
He's like, this is my money, basically.
Yeah. And so then after that, because they're riding in the car, the father stops and buys rock, with young Terrell right there.
Yeah, because one of the things the father said earlier was that, most people, because I was working, most people didn't even know that I was addicted, right? And then Terrell's like, but I knew, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're in the throes, is a commentary that you don't really know. You think you're aware, even if you're not, right? You may think that the stuff that you do
that
around
people are
your
not
kids,
aware,
right? That they're not even the kids, right? It's really the point, right? Because you think kids are just oblivious to what's happening in the world and they're seeing everything you're doing.
Well, his memory might have been messed up because, Terrell even objected in this flashback that we see. He objected and he's like, basically don't do it, right? With the guy standing at the window ready to sell to him.
Right.
And he's like, basically stop trying to mind grown folks' business.
Right.
And that was like another saying,
Whose memory are you talking about?
I was thinking that maybe Ronnie's memory.
I think of Terrell's memory because the later scene with the mother about the night of the broken mirror, the mother says that night didn't happen.
Nah, she said that night didn't happen. But she also said, well, we'll get to that point. But she says it didn't happen because she told herself it didn't happen, not because it actually didn't happen. So he's talking about grown folks' business. Again, all of these kind of things that you hear. And Titus, the director, talks about deliberately wanting to have a conversation. And he tells the story about how he's got, a son who's, getting a teenager. And his sons had questions about that relationship between he and his father. Well, basically that didn't really exist, right? Because it too had been at least 15 years at some point where they hadn't been in contact. And so he wanted to be able to have these conversations with his children about why his life was so different than theirs, right? But they didn't really understand how different it could be, and they couldn't fully explain, and he didn't have a way to explain it. And so this whole project kind of started out as him wanting to write something to them, and maybe it was going to be part of an art exhibit or something, but to write something to explain this to them, and then it turned into this movie. So, but back to Terrell and Ronnie. He then tells Terrell, though, that day he learned he could do anything he put his mind to, because we're back in modern day now. So there's, in this interview talking and discussing it and all, but that is what he learned, that he could put his mind to anything, because, he had that nail through his foot and he still continued to work. And I'm like, that just seemed so cruel. But in current times, Terrell's mother, Joyce, is telling him that, he looks just like his daddy while he's packing. And he's like, don't do that. Don't say that. Don't even compare me to him. And she asks why he's in such a rush to get her out of that house. And she's like, I have good memories here, but I know you got bad memories, but I got good memories. So in other words, and I felt like she was being a little bit unreasonable here. Like, clearly he's been traumatized. Why are you only focused on your own how you feel about the situation? Because the thing is, it should never have been about her alone, because the child doesn't have this agency and this self-determination to be able to do what they want to do when they're in a bad situation. They are just the victims of whatever the parents decide to do. And so he's got all this trauma because of decisions the adults in his life made when he was a child. And so why are you still in this late date talking about, but I still, I love this, because later she says, I still love Ronnie, right? Her ex-husband or whatever. Yeah. She still loves him. And I'm like, that's your business if you still love him. But why are you putting these things on him? Not the part about the forgiveness, because I really think maybe that was to help him move on. But I mean, just in general, you trying to explain your position of how, well, we understood you wanted to be there because you were there the whole time. You stayed much longer maybe than you should have. So why was, I just felt like,
putting
man,
what on?
Well, basically trying to make him understand her position when she should have been trying to understand his.
Well, no, because part of the problem is his relationship with his parents. So you want to know why you do this. That's all he's doing is asking why, right? So I don't think that's putting it on him. It's that you have your life because of these decisions that we made.
And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because you got the bitter and the sweet. The good is that he has the art which made him famous, and gave him money in a way to take care of his wife and family.
And it gave him, exactly, and the ideals, right? Mm-hmm. Like you teach your kids differently, right? You raise them differently because of the way that you were raised.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it just is so much to like unpack with this, but yes. So in current times, after this whole situation where, she's telling him this, then Terrell and his mother are talking a little bit later in there at a park. And he asked her about a particular house they used to live in on Douglas Street. And he's like, remember that broken mirror? And this is what you were talking about. She says that night didn't happen. It was a bad dream. It was a bad dream, I decided. That's what she said. So she knows that it happened, but she just kind of, to be able to cope, told herself that didn't really happen. This is, so she like forced denial upon herself.
But couldn't that be about a conversation? So if I go around and I say, hey, this night this thing happened and I don't remember it, then I'm going to say, well, I think that it may have been a bad dream, right? It doesn't mean that I'm saying that I don't believe that I created this idea that it was a dream. Because he has those so-called night terrors too, right? So,
and then we do get into kind of the idea of whose memory is the accurate one.
Yeah.
Is he an unreliable narrator on some level? Because he does jump in to narrate, at least at the beginning. So which part is the truth? And it's complicated.
Yeah, and I think part of it is it doesn't matter, right? There may be a truth though too that the father was addicted or abusive, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a truth. Mm-hmm. So are the details or particulars really important?
Yes. I think this detail was important because I still, even in spite of, and I get where you're coming from, I just believe that she's saying, I knew it happened, but I put it, I put it aside. I basically said, no, this didn't happen. This is not real. This is not true. And but see, she did that for her to get through it. But how did the children, or how did Terrell get through it? Because there's this incident and we don't exactly know what happens at this point in the film. And so she goes on, to talk about Ronnie being amazing at first when they got together. But she said the same thing that got a hold of this part got a hold of him. And so she's referencing again that it wasn't just that Ronnie had this problem, but this epidemic, the epidemic that they basically call it, the crack epidemic, that it went through communities. Not just one person. It affected, and
right.
You
and we know the source of it, right?
Yes.
And why it happened. So this is sort of a situation of blaming the victim, right? What happened to the community or the park is what happened to the individual.
Right. And so, but she goes on to say, I still love him. And Terrell is very confused by this. He also tells her, I remember that house. I remember and she says, I hate that you remember that house. I still love him. And Terrell is like, basically, what? Why? Now this is when Terrell gets mad at his mother. And to this point, we really haven't seen him angry with her. He's been impatient at times because she's not ready to move when he's trying to be there moving her out. But, so Terrell is like, LaRon, and her mom is like, well, LaRon has been through a lot. And he's like, you've been through a lot, mama. And she responds to that with a Bible, not quote exactly, but basically, if you don't forgive people of their sins, you won't be forgiven. So she's coming with her religious perspective to him. And Terrell basically completely rejects that and is like, I'm not trying to hear none of this. And he even says some things that are pretty disrespectful. And if you see the movie, you'll see. And she's like, you will not be blaspheming, so they really, it's ratcheting up. And Terrell explains like that his life was fear. And his mother reiterates to him, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. And, Terrell continues to be resistant. And he's like, you in this Bible. And he just doesn't agree. And then the story of Abraham and Isaac is what he brings up. So see, when you hear people reject religion, a lot of times it'll be because they don't know what the story is, right? Or it's implied that they don't know what the story is. But here, what Titus, the director and writer, and the one who's telling us this story, what he's given us is that he goes on to tell the story of Abraham and Isaac from the Bible. So it's not that he's coming from a place of ignorance. He's coming from a place of saying, I'm aware of this story and here's how I see the story that happened. And this is how he tells the story basically. And he's like, you have Abraham and Isaac, and you remember that Abraham was told to take Isaac, his only son, and that he would need to be a sacrifice. And he takes him to the mountain, and the son says, Isaac is like, where's the sacrifice? Abraham tells him God will provide it. And so just when the knife is about to break the skin, then God's angel swoops down and says, I didn't know you was going to do this. I was just messing with you. This is how Terrell translates that story from the Bible. And so then he's like, look at me, mama. Why did you leave me with him? You know what he was doing. Why? And at this point, I'm like, well, what was he doing? Was it even more than crack? Tell me, because I need to know. And so we still don't fully know, because you know how these stories go. You never understand exactly with everything that happens. You get a flashback, a piece here,
it's
and
like,
you've got to put the puzzle together.
Because I don't know what's going on. I don't know what that means.
And the mother is crying, and they're at the park. So they're in public doing this. And the mother is crying, and Terrell is crying, and Terrell's son, Jermaine, was playing, at the park or whatever. So he wasn't right over with them when they're having these conversations, And so, Terrell is so upset, he gets up and he grabs his son and he leaves. And so right after this, we get this scene where Terrell is slowly driving down the street, and his large mural paintings are in front of the houses that are the actual houses that he had painted on the street. So imagine driving down the street, but you don't see the house. You're seeing the mural that's sitting in front of the house that you can see kind of obscured by this huge painting. And so he gets out of the car at the house on Douglas Street, and he sees his younger self there, and he's like, don't do it, I think he says to him. And the man who lives there now is like, I hate this house. And he's like, I used to live here. He's like, you want it back? Then the next time we see Terrell, he's with his wife, and he's like, I don't want to be here no more. So he's ready to leave. And, he's talking to her, and he's like, doesn't it seem like sometimes the bad memories are more saturating than the good ones? How am I supposed to paint a sunny day if I don't remember ever seeing one?
And who does he tell this to?
His wife.
His wife, who's writing love songs about how her man is so great and stuff.
And this is his perspective.
Yeah, his perspective. So that would mean you are talking to your wife, or you telling your wife that you don't have any good times to remember even with her. Right? Because you can paint about those good times, but if you don't see them, then but she didn't seem to take it that way, right? But that is a perspective that I see. If someone told me that. But yeah, it reminds me of a Zero line.
What line?
Have an occasional flashback of the good time, but then I remember it wasn't no good time, just poverty-stricken and kicking it in the hood times. That's always remember that line.
So Terrell's brother then calls to say that his mother is at the hospital. She's passed out, stopped breathing, and she's in the ICU. And so Terrell, of course, rushes to the hospital. And, then we get the doctor explaining everything that's been going on with the mother, that she had high blood pressure and that they had released her from their care last weekend, but she insisted on going home. They wanted her to stay. And that they can't see the mother right now because she's really sick. And so then Terrell keeps repeating while he's there in the waiting area. He's like, she was fine when I left. She was fine. And you could see that he's clearly feeling fear and guilt over what happened with his mother. And
they had the last thing that happened was they had an argument, right? And then some of that is too, when you have heart issues, people think like they caused this to happen because, things like arguments and stress.
Yeah. And so Ronnie is also there in the waiting room. And Ronnie is like, well, we just need to pray, and God can do miracles. So he's trying to be encouraging. And this is the interesting thing we see is that Ronnie has changed even from when we saw him at the beginning of the movie, because he now has turned over a new leaf. He is very religious now. And so Terrell just ignores him and he walks out holding his son. But his wife hasn't left yet. And so Aisha is there. And Aisha says to Ronnie, she's like, have you asked yourself ever one time what's best for us? You don't get to just pick up where you left off. And then she walks out of the waiting room. So this is like her, what she, and I see her serving almost like as his defender, his protector, which seems backwards in some way. But I think anytime you have a relationship with somebody like that, a marriage, whatever it is, that you protect each other, maybe in different ways, right? Clearly, he probably physically protects her and is able to do that and protects her in all kind of other ways. But she, I think, is protecting his, or trying to stand up for and protecting his emotions, right? Because he wasn't standing up to his father and saying that. All he did is left. But she directly says this to Ronnie. And so later, Terrell tells his wife that he's going to go up to the hospital. She's like, well, I'm going to call to the hotel and tell them we're staying longer. And he's like, no, Aisha, it's your turn. This is a reference to earlier where, she wants to record her music in the studio, and all of the time and energy of their family had been spent toward his career, right? So that it could get off the ground, but he's successful now. And so now it is her turn. And she had said that she was going to be at the studio at a certain point. And unfortunately, this thing happened. And, whenever any types of things like that happen, all things are just off the table, right? Everybody needs to be there, hands on deck. And so he's like, no, but he says, no, it is your turn. So you're going to go, and mama will be mad if you haven't finished her song when she wakes up, is how he gets her to kind of go and feel okay with leaving. And that he's arranged for the child to be cared for by somebody there. So she can go off and do what she needs to do, and he's going to take care of it. And so when he leaves the hotel room, then Ronnie is waiting outside for Terrell. He got 2 cups of coffee and he's like, I'm going to take you to the hospital. So Ronnie just keeps showing up. And Terrell does not, and think about it. You're already stressed. Terrell doesn't even want to be bothered with Ronnie.
Did they call him Ronnie in the movie?
Well, so I'm referring to him as Ronnie. His brother called him Ronnie. Ronnie is what I would term is like the name of people call him when they're fond of him.
Right.
And the mother calls him.
Just call him LaRon.
Right. The mother calls him Ronnie and LaRon, depending on what's going on in the scene. And Terrell only ever calls him LaRon. Right. And so when you call him by his official name, then that's like, we not friends. I'm not calling you no nickname. This
right,
is
so
it.
It's like it's not Ronnie in the truck. It's LaRon.
Okay, so it's LaRon and Terrell in the truck. All right, And so they're making small talk in the car. And then LaRon is talking about how Terrell used to work like a man. And he's, and he says...
he's very proud of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, yeah, then one thing nobody could say is that you basically don't work, right? Or can't work.
And he talks about his own daddy. He's like, my own daddy didn't teach me nothing but work. And I had to put steel in you, talking about, from LaRon to Terrell. He's like, I put steel in you. Can't nobody say that you weak or soft or don't know how to work. I taught you that. That's what he's saying, right?
Yeah.
Because he still is like, look at what I'm giving you. He gives Terrell a box. He tells him to open it. And it's all of these articles about Terrell's big accomplishments as an artist, right? So what we're seeing here is LaRon being like, I did that, right? And not that he did the actual work, but I prepped you to be able to be who you are.
I instilled these values
yes.
in you. Yeah. But that's like just a common thing, right? And that's what the reckoning now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that at what point is it too much? And are we swinging too far in the other direction?
And being hard and not letting people have any emotions. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus not allowing anyone to ever have any hardships or struggles and what that will instill, right? Because Terrell talks about how basically he has his father's voice, right, in his head when he's trying to rear his child.
Right. And he says that when his son messes up, he thinks of something that LaRon might say, and that scares him.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want to be anything like LaRon. And then he says, I think sometimes, like, basically he's talking about balance, because he's like, sometimes Jermaine, that's his Terrell's son. Yeah. Sometimes he just needs to cry. Yeah. Right. And sometimes. It wasn't right. Sometimes, he needs to steal, but sometimes he just needs to cry.
Personally, I feel sometimes you need to shut them tears, the crying stuff, man. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you do. But I think there is some balance, but no one knows what the proper balance is. And so LaRon didn't know, and that's why he's just like, I made you a hard worker, right? He feels accomplished in what he did. And then the son, Terrell, he feels totally different. He's just like, wait, I didn't want any of that. I don't need any of that. But he doesn't consider any of it, any aspect of that as contributing to his successes. And yeah.
And I think that is the thing. We don't think about how all of our experiences have added up to who we are as a person. And what would we be or have accomplished those things without it? I was talking to my cousin and we were talking about, bad things that have happened and whatever. And she's like, well, you know what? You should be grateful that this thing happened right now, because what it's doing is it's forcing you to think of solutions and things and address things that would not otherwise have been addressed, because it would have been fine and, and whatnot. And I was like, actually, you might be right. She's like, you never, and when you think about some of the worst things that happen in your life, or, like, let's say, looking at all the current things going on right now, if you just lost your job because you work for the government, and then that could open up an amazing door, you wouldn't have been looking for one. Yeah.
Like, I think of one of the greatest examples we have in this country is like military service, right? And boot camp and all that. And the stuff that I went through, right? It was terrible, horrible, but I can see how it contributed to some things that I may need now, right?
Yeah. and a certain amount of discipline and whatnot that you have as a result of enduring those things. And
endurance, right? Because there's just a simple physical things, right? Like having a nail through your foot and then walking miles home, right?
Yes.
Is something that you may not be, you as a painter, right? Or that sort of artist, you may not use that, but there may be a time when, the car ran out of gas. We're in the middle of nowhere. I have to go get the gas tank and carry it miles. Yes. You know what I'm saying? So it's those sort of things. Or, hey, I'm hurt and I have to do something. My foot hurts because I'm walking so far, but I can reach back to the time when, even though it probably should not have happened. You should not have been trained that way, but it does make you more, I guess, resilient, in the present. Yeah, so it's always just this struggle of, really accepting the negative as a positive influence at times, which is very hard.
It's very hard to do, especially because the biggest thing is, like we said in the beginning, Terrell is being revisited by the effects of what happened to him decades ago on his life today, and it doesn't stop. So now we go back to this idea of exhibiting forgiveness. How do you forgive when you still are suffering from the things? It's one thing if somebody comes up and they smack you in the face and boom, you smacked in the face, your face heals eventually if you had any kind of injury, and then you're done. And only thing is your feelings are hurt, and then you can forgive because it was kind of a thing that happened that was an incident, and then that's it. But supposing they smacked you and it, knocked your eye out the socket and you can't see straight anymore because of this, when this thing that the person did led to other consequences that you can't get away from. Yeah. And it's always there. How then do you forgive? That is the challenge of life.
Yeah. What about the assumption that there should be forgiveness, right? Because should there be forgiveness or not?
We should just go ahead and answer that now. Should there be? I generally think yes. That's my personal creed. I'm not saying that's what other people should do. I generally think yes for a number of reasons, but first and foremost because I think it's important to try to move on.
But do you need forgiveness to move on, right? So I think it depends on who the perpetrator is, right? So if it's someone like a father, right? There are many today who would say you don't need family and all that, but I just don't take that stance, right? I think that, these are deep bonds because of the physical and metaphysical, right? Reasons that needs to be intact, right? So there you may need to, forgive and get past, right?
Yes.
But to a complete stranger who has done something to me, had some aggression or transgression, right? Then I don't need to, because I don't need to reconnect with them. I don't need to think about them or consider them, right? And I think healing doesn't require acceptance of what someone else done to you negatively.
Well, what about like in this case where for him to have a continued relationship with his father, it opens the wound every time he sees, you're triggered just by the presence of that person. You could see he physically has a response when he comes around his father. How does he do that?
It's part of our history, right? When you look at the history of the world, you look at that, and then that's the one way that there has been progress. If you look back and you see what happened, and then you go and you look at the reasons that all of these decisions were made and all of these actions happened, right? This is part of the lineage. What makes your son who he is?
Yeah.
Right? Because of your father and his father and their father. And then the more you understand that, you know more about your DNA too, possibly. Or just those, what some people call the traumas that were passed down, right? Or whatever cycles. Then you can understand yourself. Like if you get to know your father and your mother, do you know, oh, that's why I do this, or I think like this, or how this was passed down to me,
Yeah.
That's part of that reason that I think for someone who is struggling, right, to go back and get an understanding of your parents and what they went through.
And I think that's something that we did kind of maybe see a little bit. I know that Titus talks about that, because it wasn't, I think the connection for him wasn't until, and he doesn't exactly explain what his final situation with his father was. We just know that he's basically, there was an evolution. In the beginning, he was like, I would have said that my father was the villain of my story, is how he described it. And then later he begins to say, well, what led to this situation? Why is he like this? And then he began to understand how some of the things that did occur could have happened, right? Especially with his father's addiction.
And then to understand, you may think you're a great parent to your son. You don't know when he's grown how he's going to feel about how you raised him. Right? So and if he views it negatively, you going to be like, why don't you just forgive me? Let me tell you why.
So
and I think that's that forgiveness part from the beginning, right? You have to forgive what the mother said, right? To be forgiven.
And how Titus says that he defines this forgiveness is that it is the forgiveness that means you did something to me, but now I forgive you and you no longer owe me that debt. But that forgiveness does not mean that you have to walk forward with that person.
Bruh. Yeah.
That's his
we can
definition.
Get more into that when we get to the end of the film.
I just wanted to jump in here to encourage you to join our free Patreon tier. Yes, we have premium paid memberships on Patreon and YouTube channel members who get exclusive content, early releases, and other perks. But we are now also offering a free Patreon membership tier where you will get videos that are not offered to the general public on YouTube. For example, we just dropped a 3.5-hour watch party for the new Luther Never Too Much documentary on our free tier, where you get to watch the full movie along with us in our commentary. If you like what you see, you can join one of our paid membership tiers later, or you can just remain as a free member with no strings attached. This free Patreon membership does not give you access to all of the paid exclusive content and early releases that our premium Patreon and YouTube channel members enjoy, but we wanted a way to offer you a better viewing experience without many of the restrictions that we have on this platform. So come on over and join us on Patreon. The link is in the description. It's easy and free to join. You can simply log in with your Google or existing social media accounts and begin enjoying Axiom Amnesia's Patreon. Now back to the show. So at this point in the film, though, they arrive at the hospital, Terrell and LaRon, and Terrell walks in the room alone, and he sees his mother, and she's hooked up, to machines and whatever. And then the first thing he says is, "You knew." So he's like, basically, she knew that she was sick, and and that's why you didn't want to pack, and you knew that this was coming, and I just wanted to bring you home. And he's so sad in this moment. It's very sad. And he calls her name, and he's like, "Mama, Mama," and she doesn't respond. And then he says that he's sorry, and he kisses her on the forehead, and he walks out of the room. And when he comes back out, Ronnie, or LaRon, is not sitting there anymore. And so then he has this flashback to his childhood, where after the nail has been in his foot, where he's crying and he's limping down the street, and the mother asks him what happened, and she takes him to the hospital. And then there is this bill that the mother is staring at after that. And then the next thing we see, the mother confronts LaRon while he's sleeping on the couch, after he went and, because mind you, he comes back to the house after he gets his fix and whatever. And so he's laying there, and she's like, "What happened to my son?" And she wakes him up and whatever. And he stepped on a nail with filth on it, and you let him walk home by himself. So she's like really pissed off. And she's telling him, "Stop working him like he's a man. You're doing him like your daddy did you. And look at you. You disgust me." Like, she read him for filth. And she's like, "I can't believe that you're doing that again." So apparently he had a period where maybe he was not on the stuff, and then he got back on the stuff and whatever. And then she tells him, "I want you gone. Get out my house. And you're not making him into a man, and he is going to hate you for this. He's going to hate you." The mother had predicted all of this even back then. And then LaRon is like, well, let's let him hate me then, because I ain't going nowhere. And then they get to arguing and whatever. And you see Terrell in the other room. He's crying and listening from his room. And then he hears the mirror break. When he comes out, Joyce, his mama, is laid out on the floor. LaRon, he asks him, what did you do? And LaRon sit there and just casually smokes a cigarette while she's laying unconscious on the floor. And Terrell is like, help me get her, because he still is kind of too small to pull an adult and, move them around. And Terrell is screaming and LaRon just continues smoking the cigarette, doesn't do a thing. And so then that's the end of that flashback. And so mind you, this is what he thinks of when he sees his mother laying in this, hospital room. So then we see Terrell, he gets totally frantic in the hotel room, start tearing it apart, take the sheet off the bed, puts it on the wall. And then he begins to create the beginnings of painting, which is his sketch of his mother, which is, huge on this wall. And clearly this is his therapy. So he draws his mother using the base of it, using a Sharpie on a sheet on the wall. And then he just, is sitting in front of the drawing after that. And then we see Terrell's wife in the studio and she's singing. And, Terrell is watching home movies of his mother and his wife and his son, the good times. And then he's breaking down. And then, of course, next we see Terrell in the cemetery. So we already can conclude that Joyce has passed on. So then we see this art show of all the paintings of the houses on the block and whatever. And Terrell and his wife, they got to put on this happy face to fake it for the people in the show, because Terrell is still grieving his mother. But he's got this art show and we see all of the paintings and everything that's there. And who shows up at the show but Ronnie? And so he's fascinated with this piece of art that is of his own face, but it's half obscured, right? And we see Titus, or we hear Titus in an interview, not in the movie, explain what this painting actually was.
So he had this series of basically using mugshots, right? And then he recovered the faces up with tar based on how much of their time was spent in, basically.
Yes.
So that was how he, depicted his father in this artwork that his father was looking at.
Yes. And so, the painting of his mother is finished now, and it's also up on the wall. And so the art buyers, they just keep coming up to him, and he don't care about none of them, but they want to take pictures of him, and he's trying to be nice and, whatever, cordial during this. And then one art buyer comes up and he's like, oh, we have a number of your pieces and we just had to buy this and my daughter in college, and he's just like this rich guy or whatever. And he does not care. And so he goes to touch Terrell, and Terrell is like, don't touch me. Get your hand off me. And he snaps. And he's like, you don't know me. And then he just explodes and he's like, this is the painting of my dead mother and you want to hang it over your bed too? Basically just like the other, paintings that he brought and talked about how he put on the wall. And so Terrell walks off to the back. And then, of course, Ronnie never gives Terrell room to breathe, I feel like, or LaRon.
He did. That's why when he came out the room at the hospital, he was gone. Right? Because of what his wife had talked about earlier, right?
Well,
he wanted to show that, hey, I'm just here for you. I drive you to the hospital, and then that's it, right? And I think that's what that's supposed to symbolize.
Maybe that's what that symbolized. But another way to look at that is that now when he needed him the most, he comes out of the room knowing his mother isn't going to make it.
Yeah, because
nobody's there for
you
him.
and your wife don't know what you want, right? Right? But people think they know what they want. I don't want you hovering and doing all this, but then you come out and expect to see him, and this time he's not there after you made it clear that it's not all about you, right?
Yeah, mixed signals. So Ronnie or LaRon has followed him to the back, and he keeps asking LaRon why he's there. Why are you here? And then he goes, you painted me, Terrell. So he's happy, right? That he had a painting of himself on the wall. You wouldn't have expected that. And, that painting is about me being free from the darkness. And God was speaking through that painting. This is how LaRon sees it. And so then Terrell is like, what? And LaRon is like, everything gets erased or whatever, and that's God's grace, right? So Terrell says everything I saw, basically in his childhood gets played over and over and over in my head, and you talking about grace? And He's like, you think that painting is about you getting set free? Nah, that painting is about me trying to keep the past from sneaking up behind me and destroying my everything. I put it on canvas so that I can hold that shit by the throat. And I was like, dang, so here you take something that could have been positive that was positive to LaRon.
It was, right, his interpretation of the art.
And he's like, nah, this is so I can have
you
it
don't
around
want
the
the
throat.
artist telling you, like, that's what happened basically with the buyer, right? He's just basically like, yeah, we like your art and how it look, and my daughter want a piece, right? And then you get LaRon, he's like, yeah, this is what I think it mean. And then you got a pretentious artist in the moment, right? Who's just like, no, this is what it means. Right? Because it's what he felt making it, right? Which is not how we generally accept art.
No. And so LaRon says something I thought was really interesting. He's like, what I did wrong taught you to do right. I raised you the best way I knew how to do. I did you the way my daddy did me, but it worked on you. So I find that to be interesting because, he's basically like, I did the exact same thing my daddy did. Obviously, it didn't work on him in his own mind, but it worked on Terrell.
Yeah, because it's sort of like, all right, in those times before we were all around for the most part, when he's focusing on work, he's talking about taking care of his family. He's talking about financial stability and all of that. He hauled junk. You know what I'm saying? His father instilled this stuff in him, and he clearly wasn't a happy guy, right? But he instilled those same things in his son, and what he sees as him being successful, right? And what most of us look at as success. He's an accomplished artist, making money and all this, and making movies. You know what I'm saying? And that is what he sees as it worked. That worked. Because in those times, nobody was focusing on your emotions and some aspect of your so-called well-being.
And how did we get here? We get to that point because if you look at Black folks in America, that there was periods after, chattel slavery where we had to just be able to survive.
Right.
So there wasn't this, you can just, have your head in the cloud. No, you got to do something to help yourself survive.
We are in a time now where we can kind of focus on our mental health and all those other things, but there was a time when you better not. If you're wasting your time with that, we are not going to survive.
We're not going to make it. You won't even, you can sit and have your head in the clouds now, but you won't make it to next week and next month. And, and so the luxury, because it was a luxury, you got to think about the history. It was a luxury to be able to say, I even want to be an artist. It was a luxury to say, I'm going to think about how I feel. About how you feel doesn't matter when you're trying to survive. And that is one of the main differences, I think, between people now, where a lot of us have the luxury of thinking about and considering how we feel about things and not just considering our survival. Because due to the people who in our previous generations did only concern themselves with survival and who suffered in many ways, we now have the privilege of being able to think about ourselves more.
The movie is the reckoning of that. That shows a time when somebody raised just the one generation ago, right? From somebody around their 40s or, you know what I'm saying, or 50s. One generation ago, with your feelings and all of that, it was very rarely considered. Because especially as a man who is, when women didn't have rights, right? And, I'm not trying to erase the misogyny and all that other stuff and patriarchy, right? But where women couldn't work, you had to provide, right? So there is no how you feel about whatever. If you get a nail through your foot, you better figure out a way to make it happen because women can't do it.
And because
society
people
standards.
are depending on you. The whole
Yeah.
family is depending on you to hold up your bargain. And just like in a traditional situation where, maybe the woman was home with the children and doing, the domestic stuff, you got to figure that out. Just the
Yeah.
same way as the flip is true. If that day she burned her finger on the stove or burned herself on the stove, everybody's still expecting to eat. It doesn't
Right?
stop
Yeah.
just because. And this is the situation that we're looking at. Terrell, in response to LaRon saying, what I did wrong taught you to do right, he's like, so you saying that watching you abuse yourself, beat me, and put your hands on my mama made me a better father? And then in response, you get LaRon saying, but I was on crack. And Terrell is like, I was a boy watching his father on crack. So everybody is like, I have a monopoly on pain.
Yeah.
That's the result of this circumstance. And they're still at odds. And, LaRon says, you need to forgive so God can take that away. You need to pray. And those prayers didn't save my mama is the response that Terrell gives him. She still loved you, because he still can't believe it. He's like, she still loved you. And I didn't understand why she still loved you, but I think I understand now. So he has this epiphany in this moment, and he's like, I need to move on. LaRon, I forgive you for what you did to me, but I will never forget what you did to my mama. That's what he says to his daddy in that moment. And LaRon is still optimistic. He's like, but we still got the future. And Terrell is like, we ain't got no future. You took the past, but the future is mine, and it belongs to Aisha and Jermaine, not you. And Terrell cries, and Ronnie walks out. And Terrell snatched the art of his father off the wall and gives it to LaRon and tells him that it is for his prayer closet and not to stop praying for me, because earlier he told his son that he continued to pray for him when they were in the car. He continued to pray for him, even though he wasn't in contact with him. So Terrell cuts his child self out of one of his paintings that he had made earlier in the film. And this is the resolution later. And he's not in that scene anymore. And and his son comes in and he says he loves him, and he picks him up and whatever and hugs him. And I guess if you look at the painting, it's like he's freed, he is free from the painting, he freed his father, right? Because he said, I forgive you or whatever. And then he freed himself from the past of that painting.
Did he forgive him?
Oh.
And is forgiveness required because he know that the father wanted forgiveness? So you say you're forgiven. So then it releases the father, but he's still not released from whatever is there.
I think he had the intention of forgiveness, and I think that you can have the intention of forgiving, but just continue to go back and forth with the emotions and everything that's the result of just trying to get over something. Like we pointed to earlier with, he's continuing to have night terrors. Hopefully it gave him peace that would allow him to move forward. But if it didn't, then, this is something that could happen. And then I asked the question, like, is anything unforgivable? Was what his father did unforgivable?
So the thing is, the movie really only shows about two main events, right? Mm-hmm. The incident where they're hauling junk and then he has to go cut grass, and then the incident with the mirror.
Right.
So we don't know all that took place, and I think that's the problem with films like this, right? Because I am supposed to have a conclusion based off of very limited things, right? And if I do that and be like, okay, this is not forgivable, then I may be overreacting, possibly, but I don't know how far it went.
So you asked, did Terrell really forgive LaRon? I think that he tried his best to. But I think he also did not want to have to continue to interact with him. And maybe that's just too hard. Maybe that's what it is.
And like, I don't know, did he create a caveat for forgiveness to rationalize himself, right? So I can say and claim that I forgave, but then I really don't have to, right? Because I created these caveats.
Can you forgive while you're still mad? Like these are just like the things I'm wondering.
But I think if I forgive someone, then I don't have, unless it's an idea of trust, I don't have this urge to not interact with them, right? Because we're past that now, right? Unless I'm like, okay, I forgive you for the things you've done, but I can't interact with you because of your volatility in this moment. And I think that you can revert back to those things or do those things that you were doing, right?
Yeah.
So if you're still actively pursuing in your addiction, right, then that may be one thing. But you know what I'm saying?
Well, you know what here's what messed it up, I think, is that I don't think people who interact with each other regularly would have trouble forgiving one another. And and I say this because I go, okay, think about husbands and wives and people who cheat on each other, or think about parents who do things to their children. But if you're close, it is not hard to forgive the people who you really, really love and have interacted with. But it's easy to hold a grudge against a person that you don't interact with that much. And that's why, to me, I think that 15 years is,
because it's like, all right, so I can't think of a specific movie, but it's like, okay, they have this big argument, fight. I don't know, maybe cheating involved and all kind of stuff. But then it's like, here's your dinner. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, Angela and Marcus, Oh,
yeah.
In Why Did I Get Married? In that series,
I think that,
I mean, they were angry. I think they were very angry with one another. They had both committed offenses. They had both stepped out of the marriage. And they had a lot of...
Are you talking about the scene where she was being extra, though? Being extra nice?
No. What I'm saying is, I think that they did forgive each other. And they forgave each other maybe a little bit. Like, I don't think they let the snowball thing happen. Yeah. But part of that is because they remained together.
Yeah.
Like, think about when you're mad at something. Like, if you're a kid and you just like, I'm mad because, my mama won't let me do such and such. Yeah. Right.
But then you need them for something.
But you need them for something. But then also just over time, like, it's just, you realize it takes a lot of energy to be mad. It takes, and then it's awkward and you just do yourself a favor by getting over it or not. And if you don't get over it, then, move on. But when you're a kid, you can't do that.
Yeah.
If you were an adult and you're like, hey, this person, I don't have to see him ever again. Oh, well, whatever. That's your business.
But I think that's why is people try to separate, because they want to try to punish the other person somehow. And if you're still there with them, then it will basically be patched up.
Well, but then here's the flip side of that, right? And I think it can be easy to look at something and feel like people want to separate. But what if it's something where continued interaction with the person is very painful, because
then that's a want, right? You still want to separate from them.
Do you want to separate from I guess maybe by proxy, because you don't want to separate from them, but you don't want to feel the pain that interacting with them causes. Maybe, and so I guess that's the choice. But if you had it the way you wanted, you'd still interact with the person without the pain. But separating the two seems impossible, I think, at some point. And maybe the key is forgiveness. Maybe the key is therapy, intense therapy, something else. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Y'all in the comments can tell us. But this is why exhibiting forgiveness is like just the whole shebang of it all is very...
Yeah. So when
complex.
I hear that he had an art exhibit, and then it's like, so is the art representative of forgiveness, right? Because that's what conjures in my mind when I get the title, exhibiting forgiveness. And part of exhibiting is feigning forgiveness too, is one interpretation. But like, you're putting on this show, and is your forgiveness in the artwork?
Maybe. And then I was surprised that he took the art off the wall and gave it to his father, because that was a whole lot of money.
Yeah, well,
and it was a piece of him, right? It was
a piece of who? A piece of Terrell?
Yeah.
But that's what artists do. All of this. That's why the whole blow up with the buyer, right?
Which would be why you wouldn't want to give it to somebody you hate.
Well,
if he really hated him. But yeah, so these are all like things that come up. But let's talk about this. What does it mean to be a man? Because this came up in this film. What does it mean? Not for us to define it. I'm just saying, like, it asks that
right?
question.
So different times. It's different things.
Yeah,
and it's very different now. And I was randomly, I don't know if it was true, reading something about where it said back in the early to mid 80s that maybe, I don't know, up well over 60% of men said they changed the diaper, right, or parents or fathers, right? And then now that number is down to 3%.
3% of fathers who have never.
Yeah.
So in other words, men are changing more diapers today than they were back then.
I mean, what it means to be a man. Yeah.
Yes.
So
that has changed, right? All of the things where it's like, oh, it's not manly to do domestic things.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are probably more male nurses today than there were back then.
Yeah.
All of these things, right? But then also the role of his loving mother, because she loved him up and down. And I think she did the best that she could do. And he understood that, and he loved her in return. You saw him, now that he was on and popping, he was going to move her closer to him and get a nice place and all of that for her. And did his mother fail him though?
Fail him?
By letting him suffer at the hand, knowingly suffer, because that was his beef with his mother. He loved her very much, but he still had a beef.
So outside, I guess he had his mental traumas, but outside of him interacting with his father, I don't think we generally saw it, right?
Maybe not.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so I guess he's damaged, but I can't weigh that. Because I'm not the character. It's no way for me to know, right? So it's, to me, I think it's levels to how much of a negative impact it had on him, right? So is he unable to operate and have a family and love a son and his wife and treat them right? What are we measuring?
He is, his right? I think he is, right? Because he knew how to treat his son.
So his
mother really, I think, contributed to that.
His mother
and his father probably too.
Right? So then it wouldn't be a failure. The failure would be, if he was doing some other stuff, possibly.
And what about his wife? His wife, to me, was we talked earlier about what that role of, why was she there? I think she was his safe place. And the key to understanding that, I feel like, is in this song, Bricks by Andra Day, that she sings in the film, and then also again at the end. And so lyrics of the song go like this. What we do is what we do. Brick by brick, that's how we move. No foundation, building with bricks that we were never given. I am your safe place, filling the places we were never filled in, and you are my treasure. Who can say it's not a miracle? And so basically the lyrics of the song go on to say, like, in the beginning, she's saying brick by brick, and, we build this, and, we were never filled in, like all of the lack. But by the end of the song, and they kind of reference his mother as well, and saying that, she birthed this artist. And she produced a miracle, and hands with pain and grace unfold, what he does with his hands. And you were empty, but she filled you, giving you life, and, that she was never given. And now I'm so grateful. So his wife is grateful that the sacrifices of the mother, that she made this man who now she loves. And she made all things possible, a firm foundation. So in the beginning, they were saying they had no foundation. And by the end, it's acknowledging that the mother gave him the firm foundation that allows them to have the firm foundation. So it kind of comes full circle.
In terms of the film, like, her role didn't exude that, right? And it wasn't like, it's just kind of like, okay, he has a wife. You got to put that in there and try to show the importance of her in his life, but I don't think it showed them in a way of they're working together at this thing.
Yeah.
Because she just simply wasn't in there enough, right? To even establish this in the same way.
So I guess it's just, because the movie was really less about her, but, we just have to let the song fill it in.
Right. And then it was like, all right, she's an artist or whatever. And do I need that? I'm not trying to erase black women, y'all. But you know what I'm saying? I don't.
So she needed to be there because she's the next generation of the women in his life,
but
right?
In that contrast, I think was very interesting. And I don't think they explored it as enough. Enough is kind of my issue with it, right? So if you don't, then the character really does need to be there. And sort of like the movies where, okay, the movie is about this protagonist, you see him with his wife and the kid in the beginning or when he goes home or whatever, right? But yeah, I just think it was unexplored. And then I'm just like, dang, and I don't know if the position should be, she shouldn't be there, or maybe they should show more. But to me, it's one and the same.
No, I feel that. This is a good movie. You guys should watch it. It's available on streaming for everybody to be able to see at this point.
I like John Earl Jelks. I think he
was great in the film. Yeah, he was great. And so was Andre Holland. Was wonderful. They sold it. Very believable. Very talented cast.
So at the NAACP Awards, I think that they didn't win anything.
Oh, that's surprising.
And I think it was just some big films, like Bad Boys, and maybe Nickel Boys won one category. I think they were in together, but it was just like, seemed like more established people won all those.
That's how it always goes. Yeah, so I think it was good. It's definitely worth the watch for sure. And, I'm glad that this is a movie that we got a chance to cover because of our executive producer, King James.
If you made it this far, type 1 decision in the comments so we'll know you're one of the real ones who stick around.
And be sure to check out one of the videos that's on the screen right now. And visit axiom.app so that you can see all of our recent videos right on the screen with links to YouTube.